Hi there, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us today for this webinar. We'll be obviously exploring the new sight singing and recording feature in Auralia 7. So it's our hope that this new feature will be super useful for you in the way that you can include a bunch of new question types within your curriculum and deliver them as part of integrated assessments within Auralia. My name is Tim Wilson, and I'm joined today by a couple of my colleagues, Peter Lee and Tim Solly. So they'll be manning the Q&A, and if you have any questions along the way, please pop your questions in there as opposed to in the chat, which will be largely ignored. I'm just going to release a quick poll here as well. Apologies for those of you that attended last week's webinar, but this is just really useful to give you an idea of who's attending today and what your kind of key interests are. And it just helps drive the direction of the webinar as well. And finally, yes, we will be recording the webinar. So if you have, if you'd like to review this at a later stage, or if you have anything you'd like to share with a colleague and so on, we'll be sending out links to that a little bit later. Okay, I'll leave the poll open just a little bit longer. So a brief overview of what we'll be covering today. There are lots and lots of different applications for this new feature. We'll be focusing on a whole range of them to give you a bit of a broad understanding of potential uses, as well as looking at some perhaps more extended applications. We'll be also examining some of the content that we've been working to create and provide for you. You will of course be able to use this content exactly as is, or copy and edit it to suit your specific curriculum needs, if that's of use. Of course, then we'll also be looking at creating your own custom questions using this feature and integrating them into a worksheet or an assessment. And then if we get time, we'll have a quick look at how the assessment and the grading side of things work. What we'll do now is, I'm not particularly well known for my vocal tone or control. So I've got together with a few of my colleagues, and we've recorded a few examples of how this feature could be used in a variety of different contexts. So hopefully this will give you a bit of an overview of potential uses.
sol, la, sol, fa, sol, fa, mi. La.
Okay, so my colleague clearly, sadly, didn't score full marks on that last question, but that's possibly fair enough. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of just some of the question types that can be delivered with this feature. It's quite versatile and really flexible in the types of content that you can create. So clearly there you heard some basic kinds of monophonic sight singing questions, but then there were also some questions where there was accompaniment played. So the accompaniment in some cases can be notation based. You can also use audio recordings for the accompaniment as well, which opens up this feature to a whole range of different applications, including a whole bunch of kind of more contemporary focused applications as well. We'll dive into some of the instructor kind of features as we go further in this webinar. But a couple of things I just wanted to point out quickly, aside from having lots of flexibility and customization options here. One thing that some people aren't aware of is that you can integrate Auralia and Musician with your LMS, so Canvas, Blackboard, Moodle, Brightspace, and so on. And this just makes the process a whole lot more integrated. If you create a worksheet, students complete the task and then the results go straight back to your LMS. So just simplifies that whole process. Okay, so obviously recording, having students record and submit assignments is not a new thing. But a couple of key points here are that by using the tool within Auralia, it means you can wrap up these types of questions within a broader ear training task or assessment. So a couple of examples come to mind. So say if students are working on melodic dictation, you may want to ensure that they are properly hearing, memorizing, internalizing the melody before they even start trying to notate it. So now you could quite simply include an imitation question that comes before the melodic dictation question. So this will give you a clear indication of exactly how the student is hearing the question before they even get to the notation part of things. And obviously, if there are major issues there, then that will you'll be able to identify them and try and then provide some kind of linking tuition so that they can establish those kinds of basic skills. So yes, some kind of useful things there in the way that you can sequence these questions amongst other questions to provide really strong learning pathways and also clearly identify where students are perhaps struggling as part of these processes. A couple of other things that are really useful in this tool are just the parameters that you can assign around the questions. So whether students get a pitch reference, if they do, is it a tonic note, is it a chord or a cadence? Do they get a tempo reference? Does the metronome play whilst they are singing their sight singing exercise? And of course, assigning retries and checking before the student submits their answer. And finally, of course, being able to set a timer on these specific questions as well. So if you want to deliver a question where a student only has 30 seconds to look at a particular example before they then have to sing it. You can set timers on your worksheet or assessment entries to enable that. And finally, the last point here, library content. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the programs, the library is this huge resource which includes audio files, notation files, images. You can import your own content. And basically in here, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of melodies, some of them that have been written specifically to deal with say leaps within specific harmonic vocabulary, leaps within 5, 5, 7, 4, 2, and so on. And there are also a bunch of melodies that draw directly from the repertoire. So as an instructor, you have access to all of those that you can draw upon to create any of these questions. And as I mentioned before, you can then also align singing questions with perhaps rhythm dictation questions or melodic dictation questions, and create a whole sequence of questions based around some fixed repertoire that you might love working with. And that could be anything from clap the beat to identifying, singing the tonic at the end of an excerpt, a whole range of things that can now be kind of integrated within this new question type. So what I might do is just to illustrate a few of these. Questions. Is I might just jump over to my little sample demo test here. Just taking a second to load for some reason. Okay, so what I'm going to illustrate in here is just a few of those things we've just discussed and how they might appear to the student. So I'm going to start with that last example I discussed, where you may want to include an imitation question along with a dictation question to support those kind of two parts of the process. So down the bottom here, I've got my first question, which is my imitation question. And so for the student, they can simply play this. So as part of this question type, the student can listen to the melody. In this case, I'd allowed 3 replays on this, but you could set that to whatever you like. So the student will listen to that, then hit record. They would hear that melody one more time, and then they can submit that recording. So again, we're just ensuring that students are properly internalizing the melody in that they're able to replicate it before they then move on to a melodic dictation question that uses exactly the same melody. So let's have a look at that now. Okay, your students will hopefully do much better than that. But I hope that's clear as far as integrating these questions or running them in sequence back to back, so that you can just enforce those various stages of the processes of being able to hear, internalize, and then reproduce in notation. Okay, I'll just jump back up towards the top of this little worksheet as well, again, just to illustrate a couple of different things. So within all the questions, again, you have the option of displaying or not displaying notation or an image. In this particular case, the student is purely being asked to sing a 1 octave ascending major scale from the given pitch. So here I can select that button to hear the tonic pitch. And then you'll notice on here, once I start recording, you can see this particular test entry has been set up so that I can have 3 attempts at recording this before I then submit it to my instructor for assessment. You'll also see that under Play My Answer here, underneath the Start Recording button, I have a Play My Answer button, which will become available, once I record my first attempt. Again, this is something that you can enable or disable when you create a question. So if you don't want students to be able to review their answer before they submit it, you can simply set up the worksheet so that that particular button does not even appear. Okay, essentially the same question type here, but on this occasion, we are opting to display some notation for the student, just to support, provide a bit more support for the question. Okay, now, as I mentioned before, we also have options for adding timers to entries in the worksheet. So in this particular entry here, you can see there is a timer set up. So once I click on there, you can see straight away my timer is starting to count down. I've got a minute in total to attempt this question, and I believe I set this question so that at the 40-second mark, I will get a little indicator that says you have 40 seconds to go. Get your skates on. You need to submit this. So I guess in a sight singing assessment task, you may want to enable this sort of feature so that students only have X amount of time to review, practice a particular melody before they then have to actually record it and submit it. So once this time's out in another 10 or so seconds, I will no longer be able to access this particular entry in the worksheet. I'll let that play out just so you can see how that works. All right, it's expired now, and I no longer have access to it, and I've been moved on to my next entry here. Okay, so many of the other question types in this particular demo worksheet you will have already seen in the video demo that I played earlier. One question type that I would like to jump into just to explore a little bit further is the harmony matrix questions. I'm sure many of you have seen and used these types of things before, where essentially a chord progression is given and that accompaniment is played as part of this question. And the student can be asked any number of questions here, depending on what level they're at and what you're actually trying to explore with a student. So this question type essentially combines some improvisational skills with learning about harmony, hearing pathways through a chord progression, and then also potentially exploring embellishing tones as well. So I've just popped a sequence of different question types in here just to provide some examples, but it could be something as simple as sing the bass line, the displayed progression in free time. So in this case, the student's just going to hit record, they'll hear the accompaniment, and they end up basically singing this pathway through the progression. I can again get my pitch reference here. Hit record, the student will then get to hear, I've just disabled this, but the student will then get to hear the sing the root notes through this progression and record and submit that, obviously. So then as an extension of that, again, looking at helping students hear pathways through chord progressions, then you may move on to something like this, where the student's being asked to start on Do and sing one pitch per chord and move through the progression in a very smooth kind of manner. So not only is this reinforcing their oral concept when it comes to hearing their way through chord progressions, it's also reinforcing their knowledge of voice leading, which could then apply really nicely to 4-part writing exercises. You'll note here also that we put little indicators on some of these solfege syllables to indicate tendency tones and where their common resolutions are. Of course, these question types, I'm using solfege syllables here. It could also be done with scale degree numbers and things like that as well, depending on what you choose to adopt in your curriculum. So a question like this will sound more like this, and the accompaniment will be played in this particular question, which I had enabled in the previous question. So here the student could start singing from Do, sing their pathway through the progression, which I won't punish you with right now. Stop recording, and then I can, of course, play my answer back and hear what I recorded. So moving along, as an extension to that, we can start on a different scale degree, in this case, Mi, and again, find a pathway through the chord progression. I'll skip ahead a little bit here. In this case, starting on Do, singing 2 pitches per chord, choosing just from adjacent chord tones. So the student may end up going, Do, Mi, Re, Ti, Do, Mi, Fa, La, Fa, Sol, Fa, Mi, something like that. Or any other number of kind of ways they could negotiate pathways through the progression. Okay, I won't spend too much more time on here, but again, as an extension, you can, of course, then have students doing a similar thing where they're starting on Do, and this time they're singing 3 pitches per chord. And this is in the accompaniment in this case is in 3/4. So this is introducing students to embellishing tones. And so they're introducing either passing notes or perhaps neighbor tones as a part of this exercise. Okay, so again, as far as integrating, these singing questions with other question types, I also then just wanted to illustrate, having done a range of these questions, your students may then have to do a more traditional harmonic dictation question. This particular progression uses the exact progression that has been used in the previous questions, but you could, of course, include progressions that use similar harmonic vocabulary in different kinds of sequences. And so on. And then the next question type, again, is all based around that same piece of notation. But in this case, we're not only transcribing the Roman numerals and figures, we're also transcribing the soprano and the bass parts. So I'm just going to play this back, but I'm just going to randomly pop a few things in here. I think it's actually close to what it is. Okay, so not my finest work, but now I get some nice feedback. Comparing where things went a bit astray with the correct answer, and I can, of course, play both of those back. So again, the key takeaway there is, we're focusing on the singing and recording feature, but there are some great applications for integrating those question types with other kind of core year training questions within a sequence of questions. Okay, so next we'll just have a little look at some of the content that we're working on. As I mentioned earlier, all of these questions and the worksheets and assessments that we create, you can choose to use as they are, or you can copy them and edit them to suit your pedagogical needs. Again, if we just jump back into here. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that we're working on. So obviously a big sight singing focus. Up the top here, those some basic scale singing exercises, all ready to go for you, all ready to go for you. And then as we move down the list, you can see sight singing, and we kind of introduce things, and this is not in any kind of sequence at the moment, these are just all in a random alphabetical order, but you can see you can start from really basic stepwise type sight singing exercises. And let me just click on here so you can have a look. So in this case, there are 4 questions, one over each of the 4 most common clef types, and no rhythmic aspect. The student is merely having to sing a sequence of pitches. And from there, a bunch of stepwise melodies again, but with some rhythmic elements. So some of these will have an anacrusis, some won't, and in the earlier levels, they will, of course, will be starting on the tonic, finishing on the tonic, and then as the levels progress, or as the worksheets progress, starting on different scale degrees and so on. Okay, I'm not going to jump into too many more of these, but just to show you the type of content that will be available for you if you choose to use it. Going from stepwise movement, then you can jump into skips within the tonic chord, and then perhaps introduce skips within 5 and 5/7, and then some predominant chord, skips within 2 and 4, and so on all the way through to chromatic chords. And I don't think, oh yeah, we do have some applied sequences listed in there as well. So hopefully there'll be lots of really useful content that you can choose to use without having to create any custom content if you choose not to. Okay, so in addition to that, as I mentioned, we'll be looking to include some more improvisation-based exercises, not only within like the harmony matrix type format, but also some more general ones, just to develop things within perhaps a jazz context, or just helping students to hear particular scales. So, you could do things where you perhaps present a rhythm and a pitch set, and the student basically has to improvise using that pitch set around a given rhythm. You also saw that example in the demo video, where you could have students either sing along or perform along to perhaps a blues backing track, an audio backing track. In a more contemporary setting, you could, of course, have a backing track for perhaps a current popular pop song, have students either sing their part, perform their part, add an additional part as perhaps part of a more creative exercise. So many different kinds of uses there. Okay, so now as far as creating your own content, for those of you who've used Auralia or Musician a lot, this next little bit won't be that exciting for you, because you will have potentially used the notation editor and a library a fair bit. But what we're going to do is we're going to step through creating our own melody in the notation editor, and then creating a few different question types based around that notation. You can, of course, also import your own melodies if you have existing content in perhaps Sibelius or Finale. You can export it as music XML from there and bring it into the Auralia or Musician library. One other useful thing to note is, if you are creating your own content, any media is shared across both programs as well. So if you create a melody with some accompaniment in Auralia, you could use that for Melodic Dictation, you could use it for Harmonic Dictation, singing exercises, obviously. But then you might choose to use the same melody, same bit of notation in musician for perhaps a harmonic analysis question. It could be something even just writing the scale degrees under the melody, and labeling the notation in different ways, labeling cadences, all sorts of things. So for those of you who haven't explored the library before, or are completely new to Auralia musician, it may be useful to know that creating aligned theory and ear training content across both the programs is really, really easy. All right, let's jump into Auralia now. So for instructors, you will essentially use the Mac or Windows apps currently to create this type of content and assign it to your students. So I'm just in the library here at the moment. Again, on the left here, we have all our media from audio files, images, scores, and notation files. And this is, as I said before, a huge beast. You can search for all sorts of things. So if you wanted to look for sight singing questions in particular, you can simply search there, find particular melodies, and then any attached questions will be over here on the right. And you can simply preview them by clicking on the little preview button there in the top right. So there are already hundreds of questions in here and lots more coming. Now, as far as adding your own, we're going to jump over to our notation editor now. Again, as I said, this is not Sibelius or Finale, but it's quite a powerful little notation engine for creating short, simple things to get into your library for use. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump into the settings here, the little cog icon, and I'm just going to add a few extra parts. So clicking on the plus button here. So I'm going to create a melody with, say, a piano accompaniment here. And so I'm going to brace this part to my bass part. And we will set I will leave the key as C major for now. And we'll make this 4 bars in length. Obviously, I can choose different instruments here if I like, but for now, I'll just leave that as piano. Okay, so I'll just pop something together here really quickly that will most likely have Bach rolling in his grave, but that's okay. So I'll add my chords. And something like that. And then we might just pop a little melody in here in the top part. Okay, and we'll finish off. Let's finish on the tonic. Okay, so I can play this back. Actually, I might just change the tempo a bit as well. So I'll just jump back into the settings there. And we might just speed this up a little bit. And while we're going, we might just pop some figures in there as well. Just that means if we choose to, we can use this particular piece of notation for other question types down the track. Okay, so this particular composition is obviously not going to win any awards, but it may be useful if students are exploring, singing notes of the tonic, subdominant, and of the dominant triad. So now that I've created this, I'm just going to click on this little 3-lined hamburger menu here and save this to my library. And I'll just call this melody 2 for now. Again, importantly, if you haven't used the library features before, the tagging is really important so that you can easily find, locate, and use this content later. All right, great. So I've created my notation and it is now in the library. So if I come over here and I search for news 101, it will pop up the top there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a question from scratch. Again, over on the right here, I'll click on plus. And I'm going to call this sight singing 1 within the melody. And again, I'll pop my use 101 tag in there. So I can then choose the question type to be record up here in the top section. And there are 3 options here. So we'll start with the first one, which is basically set up for monophonic singing, playing, performance type questions. So what we're going to do is firstly, under the display area, we will choose the notation we'd like to display. So I'll select notation there and select. And then again, using my really useful search feature, I can find that melody. And that will bring up the notation we just created. So since this is a monophonic question, the first thing I'm going to actually do is hide these other parts, which are probably just a distraction for the student at this stage. So the little eye icon here just means I can disable visibility on those parts and also on the Roman numerals. And so this is the part that I actually want the student to see. I'm actually just going to turn off the part labels as well so that the student doesn't see the piano label there. Okay, so that's essentially done as far as selecting my notation. What I will also do here is just select my starting reference pitch. So in this case, I'm going to opt to just give the student the tonic of the key. I'm also going to include a 1-bar counting and change the tempo to match the notation. And in this particular case, I'm going to ask Auralia to play the metronome whilst the recording is in progress as a reference point for the student. Okay, so we're all done there. As instructor, I can easily preview this question here, just clicking on the little preview button top right. And this is what my question will look like. I can currently listen to the tonic. I can listen to the tempo reference, hit record, and then I am away. So it would obviously be recording right now. As a student, this question, I can play my answer, then I am away. So it would obviously be recorded. So hopefully your students will be singing with beautiful dulcet tones and nailing the melody there. So that's the first question type, really quick and simple to create. But what we're going to do now is we're going to use that same question as a basis. We're going to simply make a copy of it, and using the little copy button here. So I've got a copy, and then I can just double click on it to edit it. Sight singing 2. So this time I'm going to explore the second question type here, play or sing during playback. So that just means you can see now that playback is available, so we can include an accompaniment here for this question type. I'll click on select, and my melody 2 is already right at the top there, so I'll grab that. So in this case, I just want the student to hear the accompaniment in the piano part there. I don't want them to actually hear the melody whilst they're singing along. So I can simply disable that by clicking on the little speaker icon there. Okay, so that's set up. My melody there is already copied across from the previous question, and the other parts are hidden. Again, I can set the starting pitch and counting to be whatever I wish there. And I can also choose to enable or disable a metronome during playback. So if I preview this question, it will be essentially the same as the previous one, but now there will also be a piano accompaniment. All right, so that is essentially how that question type works. Actually, just before we leave there, I will point out a couple of things, a couple of options here that may be useful. Allow playback before starting recording. So that simply means that students will have the option of hearing the accompaniment before they actually start the drill. So that simply gives them a chance to practice if you choose to enable it before they get around to actually recording their answer. Okay, and finally, we're going to create another copy of this question type. And on this occasion, we're going to select the third question type, imitate the played work. So in this case, what we're going to do is we actually just want the student to imitate this played melody. So I'm going to turn off the other two parts here. And again, under display here, depending on how you choose to set the question up, you can either have the notation displayed, or in this case, we might actually disable it. So the student purely has to listen to what's played, essentially memorize it, internalize it, and then replicate it. So let's have a look at what this question type might look like. So again, they can get a reference. They can, in this case, because we enabled it, listen to the melody a few times. Okay, and then once they start, I'll hear it again. Auralia will stay in wait and listen mode whilst the melody plays back. And then it will switch over to start recording. In this case, with the metronome playing, the student can record their part. And then it will switch over to listen back to it. Start recording, in this case. So they are the three kind of key question types available to you. If I just jump back into the second question type with the, especially this one with the allowed accompaniment. You can see there, we can choose notation. We can also choose an audio file for our playback, our accompaniment, or we can also choose a MIDI file source if we choose to. So lots of different options there. Again, under this display area, you may have like a choral score that you have an image of, or you may grab a screen snip from a PDF or something there. So you could choose image there, and you could display that rather than using notation. So if you do have existing resources that you're already using as part of your curriculum, you can simply grab them, also import them into the library and use them as part of these question types. So, you know, a classic example of that might be, say a choral score where you want the student to practice singing a particular part. So you can have, you know, if you have some audio or some notation of the other parts being played, they can all play back whilst the student sings and practices, submits their part. So really easy to set that up, and then also have variations in that question type for students singing each of the voice types as well. So really quick and easy to create all those types of questions. Okay, so what we might do, close to time, but what we might do now is pop some of these questions into a worksheet quickly. So let me just check. So over here, we did have our Muse 101 tag set up on all these questions, which hopefully means that when we go to create a worksheet or an assessment, we can find them really easily over here. So I'm going to create a new worksheet by clicking on plus again. And I'm just going to call this in 101. And in here, I'm going to allow multiple attempts on this particular worksheet. We won't spend time going through these options now. We do have other videos that cover them in detail. But essentially, we're naming our task, setting the number of attempts students are allowed to have on the total task. And then by clicking on entries here, we can actually add our new singing questions. So I'll click on plus and library drill here. And I'm going to add 3 questions and assign 10 marks per question. And then I'm simply going to select my questions here. So again, my News 101 tag comes in super handy here. I can select all these questions and simply add them to my worksheet. If I need to preview any of these questions before adding them to the worksheet, or even after I have, these preview buttons are in various places in Auralia, allowing you to preview exactly what the question is before you add it. Okay, so I've got my 3 questions there now. Now, something else that's really useful in the test or worksheet creation side of things here is, regardless of some of the settings that you apply to the questions when you create them, you can, in many cases, override them here on a test entry basis. So by clicking on options, I can come in here and I can see some of the options that we set originally on the question itself, but I can choose to override them here if need be. So some of the most common ones might be allowed attempts. So if you want students to have unlimited recording attempts before they actually submit their audio for assessment, you can simply set it like that. If you'd like to restrict that, you can, of course, control it there. The other options here allow answer review, allow starting pitch preview, allow tempo preview. We had them all enabled when we created the questions, but if you, for some reason, wanted to disable any of those, you can turn them off here. You can also choose to disable a metronome whilst recording, and also disable playback before recording if you choose to. So just to show you how this might work, let's, so by default, these questions might look like this. Okay, so I can preview the tonic and also the tempo, and you can see I have 3 attempts available there. Now, if I start to play with these options here, and I want my students to have more options, more allowed attempts, I can increase that. I can disable answer review, and I can also disable tempo preview if I like. So now when I preview this question, you can see I've got 5 attempts here. I can hear the tonic note. I can't listen to the tempo before I attempt it, and I don't have the option to listen to my answer after I've recorded it. So the key takeaway here is being able to override these things on a test entry level or worksheet entry level just means you can really easily override questions, use them in lots of different ways depending on the level of your student, or it also allows you to use content that we've created, excuse me, but perhaps edit some of these settings so that they fit more specifically within how you like to deliver specific question types. So lots of different kind of overrides there that you can apply if you choose to. The options up the top here as well also can be used, disabling the starting pitch. That's the one that is played when the student hits record to go, disabling the counting, and also disabling the metronome there. And I will point out these features as well can not only be applied to these new singing question types, but if you need to override certain things for, say, melodic dictation questions that are already in Auralia in the library, then you can also override some of those elements using this feature as well. Okay, so I've obviously created this in the the desktop Auralia application, but I can then enable that worksheet so it will appear for students in the browser. So regardless of whether they're accessing the programs on a phone, a tablet, in the browser, on a desktop computer or a laptop, it means they can access all this content there as well. Okay, before we get close to wrapping up, I hope this little exploration has given you some idea of the kind of scope and the potential applications for this question type. But the more you think about it, it's essentially a recording tool which you can surround with a bunch of parameters that are really specific to your training and theory type concepts and the ways that they are traditionally delivered in courses. But thinking outside of those key applications, you can of course just use it as a recording tool amongst a larger task. It could be memory skills where you display some notation or a score as part of one entry in a worksheet, and then that gets timed out. You set a timer on that so it disappears. The student moves on to the next item where they then have to perform that or record it from memory. As I mentioned earlier, it can be used for some really fundamental type exercises as well. You might choose to play an audio recording and then have the student clap along, sing the tonic at the end of it, things like that, as well as transposition, keyboard skills, even submission of recordings of orchestral excerpts or entrance exam type performance things. It could potentially be used in that type of context as well, and again all wrapped up within a larger entrance exam type context. I did mention the contemporary music side of things, and I do feel as though this feature is going to be really useful in that context as well, not only for sing the vocal melody along with the given backing track, but also in terms of more creative type exercises, compose and record a part given an accompaniment, and that could be not only for vocalists but for instrumentalists and a whole range of other things, not only to qualify their performance skills, but also to qualify their creative skills as far as adding a guitar part, adding a counter melody, adding a saxophone solo to something. Lots of potential applications there. Okay, we're almost there. We'll just have a quick look in the Q&A. I think my colleagues have answered the few questions that have been asked there. One of them was about the solfege matrix. Can it be adapted to use scale degree numbers? So we'll be creating a mix of different question types. How far we choose to go with that is another thing. As someone's mentioned there, could use scale degrees, could use fixed do, could use do bass minor or la bass minor. So there are a few variations. So we'll be playing around with that and figuring out exactly the type of content, exactly the type of content that we're going to provide to support all those sorts of things. So for the grading, let me show you that really quickly. I might not have any examples in here. So the grading for the instructor happens under the grading area here. I've got my singing worksheet that I can select, and I can jump across here, select grade. So in here, I can see the question, and I'll just use this little filter. These are all in here, beautiful. So in here, I can basically play back what the student has submitted. I can add my grade up the top bit here in the top section here, add comments for the student, and also add private comments as well if I need to track them. And then I can step through the worksheet and add. Okay, so lots of options there. If I choose to regrade something as well, then I can also keep a history of all of that. So as I said before, if you are LMS connected, those results can then flow straight back into your LMS gradebook. So another quick question. So the assessment is not automatically done here. No, this is a manually assessed tool. And there's also a question regarding rhythm reading assignments. So you could use this tool for that. The rhythm tapping topic, say that fast lots of times, rhythm tapping topic. Rhythm tapping topic in Musician is probably super useful for rhythm reading exercises. It goes from very basic content through to septuplets and all sorts of advanced content and meters. I would generally suggest using that for that kind of assessment. Yeah, all the topics and levels are all there ready to go. Having said that, you could certainly deliver it using this feature if you chose to, but it would be a manually assessed task in that case. And the rhythm tapping topic does a really good job of automatically assessing all those types of things. Okay. So for those of you who are not currently using the programs, if you are interested in having a bit of a play, I'll just release another poll. You can always sign up at a later time. There's no obligation here. But this just means we know straight away that you'd like to have a play with the programs further, and we can set you up with cloud trial access. Okay. Finally, this is the second of 3 webinars where in our current series. We do have another one coming up about diversifying your curriculum, not only accessing a lot of the great content that's already in the library, which draws from works by women composers, composers of colour. We'll also be exploring, accessing other resources, so features where you can point to, say, YouTube clips, things on your LMS, Spotify playlists or Spotify links, IMSLP scores, all sorts of things like that that can really help expand your curriculum and integrate, popular music, world music, jazz, and a whole bunch of things that we can't necessarily supply directly in the library for you. We also did do a webinar last week demonstrating a new 4-part writing feature, which will hopefully be super useful. This is an automatically assessed feature. Will hopefully save instructors lots and lots of grading time and give students really clear feedback as they're kind of negotiating this somewhat tricky learning area. What I'll do is I'll just pop links into the chat here so you can access that. And finally, just some resources here that may be of use, whether you're currently using the software and if you're an expert, or if you need some help along the way. We love getting feedback about anything relating to the software, workflow, content, curriculum requests that you might have, things you really dislike and would love to see improved. We'd love to hear about all of that. So please get in touch. We do also have our weekly Zoom support going on, which every Wednesday, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, USA, hosted by my colleague Tim Solly. So feel free to drop in there with any questions. And finally, we have a Facebook group, which I think a bunch of attendees are already members of, and it essentially is just a nice forum for people to share experiences with the programs, share best practice ideas, and hopefully deal with any issues or queries you might have. I'll pop, again, a few links into the chat there if any of those things are of interest. A YouTube channel is useful for training videos and things like that. So we're constantly updating that with new content as well. Okay, so that brings us to the end. Hopefully all your questions are answered. One other final thing here that was an interesting question. So the recording feature is audio only. So that is correct at this stage, but stay tuned. A lot of these features are kind of in their infancy, and I think they're super powerful and really useful as they are now. But we have lots and lots of plans for where we're going to go with these features as well. So yes, stay tuned. So I hope that was really useful as far as exploring this new tool, regardless of whether you want to dive into all the customization side or not. There should be hopefully lots of great content in there that you can choose to use in your courses that can hopefully just make this workflow much more integrated for students, and hopefully provide some really nice learning sequences for them, where, again, as we said earlier, we're helping to qualify how they're internalizing things before they perhaps move on to melodic dictation, harmonic dictation, and then further into part writing and a range of other topics. So thank you very much for attending. Please do let us know if you have any questions. I'll leave the Q&A open for a little while for anyone who wants to pop anything in there. But otherwise, take care. Thanks for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you again some other time. Cheers.